Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the webinar, The Value of Literary Festivals. My name is Giulia Rossetti and I'm a lecturer in events management here at Oxford Brookes University. This webinar is a conjoint project between the Business School and the Oxford International Centre for Publishing, where Angus is the director.
Hello everybody. And thank you very much for joining our webinar today. I firstly want to thank our speakers and panelists in advance for sparing the time this afternoon. And I also want to thank our student helpers from the Business School and from the Oxford International Centre for Publishing for their help with today's event.
The webinar is going to be structured in 3 sessions. So first, we are going to have our first session focusing on literary festivals before COVID with 2 presentations. We are then going to have a very quick coffee break. At around 10 to 3 UK time, we are going to have our session number 2 on literary festivals during COVID and lockdown. We are going to have other 2 presentations during this session. And then around 3:30 p.m., again, UK time, we are going to have a break, a networking cafe. So you're going to have time to prepare your cup of tea or coffee, and we're going to have some activities, some networking activities. Then at around 3:45, there's going to be our last session, which is an industry panel. And we are going to discuss and reflect on the future of literary festivals and the publishing industry.
And we have a few rules of engagement. So if you want to submit a question, you're welcome to do so, but please use the Q&A at the bottom rather than the chat. So the Q&A, if you want to ask the questions we're going along, that's absolutely fine. And we'll take them towards the end of each session or more during the panel session. And just to alert everybody, we are recording the webinar, so there will be a recording available afterwards. So I think we're good to go, Julia.
Yep, perfect.
I'm chairing session 1, so which is entitled Literary Festivals Before COVID. And I'm delighted to welcome 2 speakers, Dr. Guido Guerzoni from Italy, and Julia, who's introduced herself just now, Dr. Giulia Rossetti from the Business School here at Oxford Brookes. So we're going to start with Guido first of all, and I'll introduce him a bit more fully. So we're very fortunate to be joined by Guido from Italy. Dr. Guido Guerzoni is a manager, educator, designer and author who in the last 30 years has been interested in the history and economics of art markets and collectible goods in the modern contemporary age and in issues of economics and management of cultural institutions. Since 1996, he's taught at the Porenoenelegge University in Milan, where he's currently adjunct professor of museum management. So thank you very much, Guido, for joining us. And I'll introduce Julia now more fully as well. So Dr. Giulia Rossetti is a lecturer in events management in the Business School here at Oxford Brookes University. She teaches modules related to events, festivals and marketing, and her PhD research at the Technological University of Dublin explored cultural capital developments at literary festivals in Ireland and in Italy. So thank you, Julia, as well. So I think we're going to start with Guido, first of all, if you'd like to share your presentation.
Yeah.
And your talk is entitled The Economic Value of Literary Festivals in Italy.
Yeah.
And over to you, Guido. You've got about 15 minutes.
Yeah, thanks. Talking about the sources of economic value, I want to consider the 4 general categories that determine then the economic value. Namely the economic impact, the fiscal impact, the communication impact, namely the attribution of an economic value to media coverage, and then the social impact. These categories, and I'm starting from the economic impact analysis, have been widely used, not in Italy in the last 25 years. There are a few cases. But when we talk about economic impact, normally we add 3 different effects, direct, indirect, and induced. This is a standard methodology adopted worldwide in the last 40 years. Obviously, you could determine the GDP, the number of full-time employees, and other economic indicators, but nevertheless, there are some intrinsic methodologic limits that have been criticized by the economists who dealt with this topic. So there are many different examples of impact studies focused on the economic value in the festival area, but there are several shortcomings that not only they are conditioned by the need to obtain a political return, so numbers are given with some fantasy. They normally don't distinguish between short, medium, and long-term impact, so it's not easy to determine the legacies properly. The boundaries of the study area, so-called region, are normally erroneously defined, so they are too narrow or too wide. Quite frequently, the expenses of residents and occasional visitors are included, which is not correct from a pure perspective. Sometimes they are too expensive, so if they have to be carried out properly, sometimes it's too expensive, so the clients rely on local suppliers or some internal analyses whose results are biased by obviously this condition. And so broadly speaking, there are some caveats concerning the use and abuse of this one. In this regard, I believe that it might be useful to share the most recent EU guidelines. So I prepared this slide when UK was before Brexit. Namely, they remain as guidelines to create some impact indicators. So the European Commission focusing its analysis on the impact, the economic effect of the economic capital of culture. They determine the features that a proper set of indicators should maintain. They should be quantitative as well, objective, synthetic, articulated in autonomous sub-indices, methodologically sound, communicable. They have to be used in different geographical contexts, and they have to be useful for conducting ex-ante and ex-post analysis. So these are the requirements. And going to the first data, there are not so many studies carried out on Italian Literary Festival. This is the full list of studies which have been carried out using proper methodologies. I excluded the studies that could not be considered as such because from methodological perspective were too weak. So there are at least 20 cases, but there are only 4 literary festivals who carried out a proper analysis of the economic value. So Festa Letteratura di Mantova in 2006, I was the author of that study. Festival della Mente, 2007, and again, I was the author of that study. Salone del Libro di Torino, which is not really a literary festival, but considers itself as a literary festival, and not just a fair. And then Porenoenelegge, and I was the author. So I don't want to celebrate myself, but the question is, there are not so many other examples of, economic analysis of impact festivals. And normally, here you have the number of single visitors. And there is a huge debate about how you could estimate properly the number of festival participants. Too frequently, numbers are given, random. So they don't distinguish between presences and visitors, maybe single visitors. Then you have data concerning the budget, the economic impact, the multiplicator, and the full-time equivalent, which is obviously an abstract number. It is probably even more interesting to add some remarks on communication impact analysis. Even in this case, there is no any agreement about which is the method more correct. Many festivals still use AVE, which is a method that has been rejected in the last 10 years, but is common a share is easy to be understood. So if you want to estimate the economic value of the literature festival, we can't exclude which is the economic value of media coverage. Normally, you have to distinguish between paid media, namely spaces that you are buying from, the media coverage that you don't pay for it. Normally, they're obtained, and in this case, many Italian literary festivals, they are able to obtain an impressive media coverage even outside Italy. And this attention has a value. So as many festivals used to do, and this was my consideration about the limits, the interesting limits of advertising value equivalent method. These are some examples of festivals which regularly use this approach in order to, declare another source of economic value. Only Porenoenelegge in 2019 declared the economic value of media coverage was 50 million euros, which is a fairly impressive value. Consider that is 30 times the more than 30 times the production budget. So it's not by chance that all the most important festivals include in their conference release or press kit the economic value of media coverage, like the Sundance or the last edition of SXSW in Texas. So just give a look to the numbers, and I believe that as scholars we should include even this dimension when we try to determine the economic value of a festival, of a literature festival. Porenoenelegge, and I don't want to spoil those who will follow, but in 2009 I tried to estimate the long-lasting economic legacies of festivals. So they not only determine these 50 million of economic value, but they consider how the impression and the judgment of many different stakeholders were modified positively by the existence of the festival. So they interview more than 5,000 individuals belonging to different 9 stakeholder categories, with a response rate which is anyway positive. So they got more than 1,000 of full response. And undoubtedly, if we consider the economic value, we have to analyze carefully even the long-term legacies. So what happened after 10 or 20 years? In this regard, many entrepreneurs reveal that they are not only proud of being citizens from the city of the festival, but they use Porenoenelegge as a reference to underline the positive aspect of their own job or their own company. So these are other examples of economic values that should be embraced in a broad sense. And I want to conclude my intervention just offering to highlight. If you want this research, they were not published, but are available. So I used to carry out every 2 years or 2 or 3 years a survey on the most important Italian literary festival. In 2019, we close this research. We invite almost 109 literary festival of national relevance, and we obtain a 45% of response rate. This is the last picture taken, on literature festival in Italy before COVID. And the sample is, representative of, among the respondents, I got, 99% of the top festivals. So, the duration was between 3 and 5. 60% of festivals were completed for free. So I don't want to summarize the most relevant effect, but it's just to say that if you're interested in this data, I'm glad to share because we carried out 2 surveys. One was the last before COVID, and here you could see, topic, duration, price, budget, revenues, communication channels, number of events, typologies, outside festivals. So I could leave just a few seconds if you want to get through the data. This is not my main intent. What I want to call your attention is the second survey that I concluded in December of this year. So we analyzed data from the 2020 edition of 87 festivals in order to detach what happened pre and post-COVID. The duration obviously was shorter. Only 70% of festivals canceled, 40% was postponed, and 7 proponed a double edition. Pricing, 67% kept the same pricing. They reduced slowly the global budget. They reduced the number of events, but, and I'm going to conclude, there are 2 elements that should be underlined. So, Literary Festival in Italy went online. Sometime they organized, 2 editions, one during the summer live, obviously with a reduction imposed by COVID, so they could not host more than 10% of the live presence, but the average number of participants per event in streaming was impressively high. So they have 10 times. If we compare the data of 2020 with the pre-COVID, so for every single event, they got 10 times the number of live, participants. And in this regard, we ask the festivals to declare what they're going to do in the next years. And they say that they are convinced that COVID just accelerates some process, but they will maintain a hybrid version even when it will be possible to come back to a normal situation. So they experimented many streaming on direct on Facebook, YouTube, or StreamYard. They opened a festival TV. They launched a lot of podcasts. So the whole scenario of literary festival was completely modified by COVID, and they invest on archive. So now they have an impressive number of titles that are becoming broadcasters. So they are accepting the idea of that they're becoming a publisher and later a broadcaster. And just concluding my intervention, the organizers are just considering to engage in some innovative methods for the 2021 edition, providing obviously greater digital interaction, use of small formats, more economically sustainable and suitable for the web, with a greater involvement of the local territories. Even Porenoenelegge experiment this format, with an extension of the program to during the whole year, not only in 1 week, and with new live and offline formats. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Guido. Perfectly to time. So we've got one question already in the Q&A, but I propose we take that at the end. Julia, if you're ready to go now, we'll hand over to you. And you're going to be talking about the cultural value of literary festivals and analysis of Irish and Italian festivals.
Yes, thank you very much, Angus. So as Angus said, I did my PhD in Ireland at Dublin. My supervisor was Bernadette Queen. And my research was about the cultural value of literary festivals. So today I would like to discuss with you some of the findings of my PhD research. The main aims of the research were to understand whether and how adult attendees can develop their cultural capital. So I used the concept of Bourdieu of cultural capital, and the research included 2 case studies, 1 literary festival in Ireland, the Listowel's Writers' Week, and 1 in Italy, Porenoenelegge. There were 3 data sets So I collected 94 on-site, semi-structured, short interviews during the festivals, half in Ireland and half in Italy. And during the festivals also, I collected participant observations. Then the third and last dataset was made of 34 in-depth, semi-structured follow-up interviews, half in Ireland and half in Italy, from 2 to 4 weeks after the festival. And that was extremely important to understand also the short-term and kind of also long-term cultural impact of festival participation. So the main findings revealed that yes, people were able to acquire what Bourdieu called cultural capital. So as you can see here, I was able to create a model of cultural capital development associated with literary festival participation. And I also seek inspiration from Stebbins' serious leisure perspective. So respondents said that they acquired new cultural capital, so they learned something new, they bought books, for example, or they incremented their cultural participation. Others said that they were stimulated to acquire cultural capital after the festivals. So once at home by, for example, reading more, starting to write, or even do a bit of research on particular topics, or even chatting, discussing, sharing opinions with other people. And finally, some interviewees said that for them, it was much more a process of cultural resources that were reinforced by their participation. So they felt that their pre-existing cultural resources, such as, for example, knowledge, interest, even values, were really reinforced. So here the question was also understanding what do we mean by cultural outcome, cultural capital development. What did they really learn about? What did they gain from their experience? Respondents were given different type of answers. So as we said before, some people were able to purchase books. So this is very linked to what Bourdieu called objectified state of cultural capital. So they were able to purchase cultural goods, books, but also other type of cultural goods like paintings. Other participants who participated in a writing competition and maybe won the writing competition, they said that for them it was, yes, a recognition for their writing, but for some of them also was even more than that, was almost obtaining an educational qualification. And this is very much connecting to what Bourdieu called the institutionalized state of cultural capital. Then, as we saw before, people were able to learn about other books, for example, the difference between fiction and a memoir. Others said that for them, they started to read more after the festivals, or even differently, so new type of genres and books that they would have never read otherwise. Some respondents said that they started to reflect, or they've learned something new about some cultural topics like politics, but also philosophy or religion. And that was very much connecting to the type of events they attended during the festival. For aspiring writers or authors, festivals were occasions to network, learn from each other, learn from the peers, and learn about funding opportunities or writing styles. Then other respondents said that they were sparked new interests. For example, they defined the festivals like inspirational. They said that the festivals can make people look at things differently. And also one interviewee said that during the years, because she attended the same festival several years, she realized that actually she would like to work for a festival organization. People were also able to get to know, engage, and learn about local heritage, both tangible as well as intangible. So they enter physical spaces. For example, in Ireland, the Writing Museum, in Italy, the church, or even local exhibitions, or even get to know tangible local heritage, intangible like traditions. For example, in Ireland, one respondent said she realized that white pudding is square shape and not round in Listowel. Because of some writing workshops, also people develop their writing skills, for example, writing songs. But what was very interesting is that respondents were also able to realize that they acquire some other skills. For example, to be alone. In the dataset of the on-site interviewees, 45% of the respondents were attending the festivals alone. And they said that for them, it was almost an exercise to develop their skill to be comfortable in being alone, even though in a crowd. In contrast, for others, they said that since they are extremely introvert, the festival was an opportunity for them to be more social, to develop their social skills, because they were talking, engaging with people, sharing opinions and knowledge. For others, also was an occasion to read in public. Finally, some interviewees said that they felt their cultural values being reinforced. For example, one interviewee in Italy, after she attended an event on social media, she said that she went back and she really reflected on what she knew and her own value on social media. For others, they really felt their self-image being improved. So all this means that when we talk about cultural outcome of festival participation, we can see that it's not really only related to literature, books, and authors. It goes beyond literature to include really a broad cultural capital outcome. And it's not just knowledge and skills, but is much more than that, even to include what Bourdieu called objectified and institutionalized states. So almost recognition of an educational qualification. The final question was to understand how does this happen? So how did they acquire cultural capital? So as you can see here, seeking inspiration from the serious leisure perspective, I was able to identify some elements that shaped the occasions and the ways people had to develop their own cultural capital. And so let's have a look at them together. So there were 5 external elements: time, space, festival features, social and cultural context. So for example, the number of venues, the type of venues, the location of venues, or also the fact of having bookstores allow people to enter spaces, buy, purchase cultural goods. When we talk about social context, we were talking first about the imminent group. So if the interviewee was attending alone the festival or with somebody else, or even the entire festival audience, because again, people were sharing, were listening, were chatting, or even the entire town, because during the breaks between one event and another within the festival program, people also had occasion to really explore the towns and talk with locals, learn from the locals as well. While in terms of the internal elements, the elements that really play a role in this cultural capital development process were pre-existing levels of economic and capital resources. So, for example, the pre-existing interest, knowledge, skills really shaped how people consume festivals and selected some events to attend. Or the behavioral dimension refers to the 5 senses and how people really behaved, so to whom they spoke, or if they really tried, for example, local food or drinks, which kind of space they entered. So really the 5 senses. And also demographic features, so age, gender, or even origin, if they were locals or tourists. Now, I would like to reflect with you on this element, the literary festival career and involvement. So, seeking inspiration from Stebbins, it was possible to create and cluster participants into 11 literary festival careers, as you can see here. For example, we have incidental here at the bottom, that were participants who were in town for another reason, and basically they decided to attend the festival by mistake. Then we had supporters who were performing a role of support to another attendee or a speaker, and parents, so people who were not really leaving the festival for themselves, but for the children. So the boundaries of these careers were actually very blurry, and they intersect each other. So, for example, one person was able to perform one role during the morning as a passionate reader. So this is very important to see how people really consume festivals and also have some types of outcomes from participation. This could be also very useful for practitioners in terms of, for example, marketing strategies. It was also useful for us to understand their cultural outcomes. So those who acquire less cultural capital were incidentals, supporters, and parents. Those who acquire more cultural capital were purposeful tourists, so people who really travel to the festival because of the festival, passionate readers, aspiring writers, and professionals, so authors, published authors. Those who bought more books were passionate readers and professionals. And those who developed more skills, writing skills, were those who were already writing, so aspiring writers, authors, competitors, so people who were involved in the festival program because they were attending a writing competition, or devotee who were involved in the festival production, so they were published authors who were speakers, but exactly as competitors and volunteers, after being a volunteer or a speaker, they also attended other events just as members of the audience. And finally, competitors, volunteers, and devotees who were involved in some ways in the festival production or program were able to acquire specialized interests and skills connecting to their level of involvement with the festival. And finally, I would like to just focus quickly on the element of enjoyment and asceticism. When asked to describe their experience with one adjective, 41% of the on-site interviewees said enjoyable, 20% satisfying, 20% fulfilling, and 6% gratifying. So it seems that the enjoyable, fun, hedonism element was more important than the educational. However, a more in-depth analysis revealed that these two dimensions of participation, so the hedonism, the fun, enjoyable element, and the serious fulfillment, what Negrier called asceticism, so this willingness to learn, really to feel an educational outcome, were two wheels of the same bicycle, as a respondent said. So loads of people were saying they were learning because they were having fun, and they were having fun because they were learning. So it was really, really impossible to create dichotomies, as these two dimensions was really connect to each other. And the final interesting finding was the education was mainly spontaneous and unexpected, so it was not really planned. And even though for some respondents it was not the main motivation to attend the festivals, it was anyway an outcome. So to conclude, we can see that literary festivals do enhance cultural sustainability. They are arenas for people to share knowledge, learn from each other, network, or even acquire cultural goods or obtain a formal qualification. And we also have seen the importance of the physical dimension of participation, with people exploring, entering spaces, tasting local food, really engaging with the five senses. So my questions for you, we can discuss these also later on during our breaks. Since now literary festivals are going digital or hybrid, will they survive? And if so, in terms of cultural outcome, what will be the learning and cultural outcome of digital and hybrid literary festivals? Are we going to see a different and more rich cultural outcome, or are we going to experience a loss of cultural outcome? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julia. And so I think we've got time for 2 or 3 questions. We've already got one in the chat, but do put your questions in the Q&A. I think the first question is to Guido. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it, Guido, but I'll read it out. I'll read it out now. So to Dr. Guerzoni, if you are creating a report into the value of a particular festival to the local area, is there a way to measure the economic impact if you do not have access to local business, local government expenditure, profit data? What proxies or information could someone use that are accessible to the public to measure economic impact?
In my experience, there are no alternatives other than, carrying out a serious survey. So all the data concerning personal expense as well as provenance or duration of stay could be obtained only through some interviews, not less than 1,000. In my experience, I never got samples which were minor than 1,200 of full respondents. Because if you analyze the literary festival during 4 or 5 days, including maybe 6, 7 different venues or different spots, it's important to divide and to rely on at least 15 or 20 volunteers. Normally we've got 12 or 10. And they know that they have to submit and to carry out interviews at different times of days, in different places of the city. Otherwise, you don't have a reliable portrait and you don't get proper information to carry out an economic impact. And sometimes the information concerning the economic operators could not be obtained, or maybe their declaration could be misleading. Sometimes they complain is not enough. Sometimes they say it was marvelous, but you can't get the data concerning the sales of single restaurants, and it depends if we are looking at a small festival in a small village or a literary festival in a city of, with 40,000 of residents. In this regard, not all the same spot of the city has benefited from the festival. So I trust more, surveys and in-depth interviews with the audience. Otherwise, I don't see other proxies which are really reliable in this perspective.
Okay, thank you, Guido. I think we've got a question just come in for Julia. I'll read it out. Julia, why did you develop an interest in literary festivals, and how important has your own knowledge of literature been in building that interest?
Thank you, Angus. It comes from actually back in Trindo. So the question comes from Hellenic, my dissertation supervisor during my master's. So we worked together, and I developed an interest in festivals in general. And then, of course, my PhD, my dissertation, master dissertation and PhD was on literary festivals.
Okay. And another question for Julia. Do you think the best way to measure cultural capital is through the type of language used by respondents and their answers? Is there a way to measure cultural capital in a more quantitative, data-driven manner?
Yes. So my research was entirely qualitative. So it didn't include any quantitative survey or data. It is possible because, again, Bordeaux is very much focused on quantitative analysis. The question disappeared.
Yeah, is there a more quantitative way?
Oh, yeah, in terms of the type of language used. So I was able to speak both Italian as well as English. So I put the focus on the researcher. So when I collected my data in Italy, I was speaking Italian, and then in Ireland in English. So it's always useful, yes, to help the respondent, the interviewee, as much as you can.
Okay, Guido, question for you. Who were the 9 stakeholder groups mentioned by the first presenter? I assume that's Guido, if you can answer that.
Yeah, I don't remember the full list, but we have former volunteers, in order to understand if the experience that they carried out in their youth modified their decision about, for instance, the kind of universities that they took. So the question was, did the festival experience modify your decision concerning your university studies, for instance? And the response was, in this case, extremely positive. So undoubtedly, they changed their choices since they have been exposed to the festival experience. Then we have journalists. Then we have publishers. Then we have local entrepreneurs. Then we have I have to divide between companies of the same areas and the owner of restaurants, bars, and booksellers. Then we have educators. Then we have politicians. So probably I don't remember just one, but these 9 categories of stakeholders, they represent different interests which were related to the festival.
Okay, thank you, Guido. I think we've got time for just one more question that's just appeared in the chat. So to both, please, festivals are often under pressure from funders and local government to defend their existence through presenting value. But the way we measure value and impact can be responsive to this pressure, or can it lead on to defining new ways to present value and impact? What role do we have as researchers to balance these 2 forces? So perhaps just a quick response from both of you, please, and then we'll have our break.
Julia first.
It's a very good question. Again, as a qualitative researcher, instead of measuring, especially for what I did during my PhD, it was much more about understanding, because it was also a very exploratory study. So I didn't really measure levels of cultural capital acquisition, but it was, again, an exploratory study in terms of first getting a real in-depth analysis and understanding. Guido, in terms of economic capital, maybe you were measuring really the economic value.
Yeah, what is probably more important is to be transparent about the methodology you are adopting and the pitfalls. So it's important to be sincere about the intrinsic limits of different methods. Now, there is a huge variety of different solutions. So there is a market for methodologies. What probably the festival work could do is to share some methodology, to share some templates, or otherwise every single festival is trying to invent its own methodology, and at the end these values are not comparable, and since they're not comparable, they're not credible in a certain sense. So what we're trying to foster in Italy is the adoption of some common and shared tools of measure, quite simple, but at that point you have a base, you have a common ground. And so you are not, maybe you could refer on other festivals' evidences, but this is admissible just because they are sharing the same approach. Otherwise, remaining isolated is festival remain too weak.
Okay.
This is a good. Sorry, just to say, this is a really good question, because the really the need of measurement sometimes is a question per se, as in, like, do we need to measure how and can we measure both economic and cultural value?
Okay, on that note, I think we have to stop we've got a 5-minute break, so we come back in 5 minutes with our session 2. And so thank you to Julia and Guido very much for fascinating presentations.
Thank you. Shall we start our second session? Nicole?
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So it's my pleasure to introduce the second session. It's an area I have a lot of interest in personally. This is about literary festivals during COVID. So we have 2 speakers about this topic. The first is Dr. Bernadette Quinn. It's my delight to actually have to introduce her. I think I've read basically every paper Bernadette has published, but never met her. So it's wonderful to meet you. And it's also wonderful to meet Dr. Miriam Johnson, because I don't think we've ever met before. And you're right here from Oxford Brookes. So I'll just say a little bit more about our 2 presenters, and then I'll leave them to get rolling with what they want to talk about. So I think I'll first start off with Miriam Johnson, because she appears first on my list. So she's a senior lecturer here at the Oxford International Centre for Publishing. Her professional career includes work as a second-hand and collectible bookseller. She's founder of the Istanbul Review and working in the Scottish Pen and Scottish Book Trust, as well as developing an immersive literature project in Edinburgh in conjunction with the Bridge Awards at Edinburgh UNESCO City of Literature. Bernadette is a senior lecturer at the Technological University Dublin. She has written extensively about arts festivals and cultural events, being interested in the roles that they play in transforming space, reproducing place, and shaping identities. I think with that, we start first with Bernadette. You have 15 minutes, but just to kind of help you out, when you reach that 15-minute mark, I'll put the applause sign by my screen, so just so you know.
Now, hello everybody. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
And are you seeing the full screen or also my notes?
Also the notes.
You're also seeing the notes. Okay. Just let me see if I can do this a little bit better. Whoops. You're still seeing the notes, are you?
Yes.
Yes.
If you go to when you go to share screen, advanced options,
portion. Yeah. Now, I think that's better, is it? Now, okay, all right. Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about literary festivals and the pandemic. I'm going to be presenting some work here from an Irish context. I'm trying to move to the next slide here, and let me just... Now, okay, so just to start, can I just explain that the work that I'm going to present here forms part of my work as part of the Festa Space project, which is a HERA, Humanities in the European Research Area funded project. And so I work with a number of colleagues based in London, in Glasgow, in Gothenburg and Barcelona. But today I'm simply going to be reporting Irish material. And our work is about festivals and events in general, but today I'm just going to be speaking about literary festivals and some of the work that we've been doing on the creative responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've been gathering data since about June 2020. It's qualitative material here based on observation notes from attending meetings organised by the Arts Council of Ireland with festival makers, focus groups and in-depth interviews with practitioners, as well as desk research. I'm contextualising my work this afternoon in the literature on crisis. One and Hart argue that crisis, if it implies threat, it also presents opportunity. And the question I asked this afternoon, is that the case for literary festivals? The work on crisis talks a great deal about uncertainty. And of course, we have been so used to uncertainty over the last 12 months of this pandemic. Uncertainty, I would argue, is something that festivals are actually very well used to, whether they are small festivals reliant on public funding or whether they are large commercial festivals, and they're very used to uncertainty. But of course, in the context of the pandemic, uncertainty is unprecedented. So the question then of how to deal with uncertainty, it's thought that in crisis, inactivity and non-decision is simply not an option, but decisions have to be taken very rapidly. And in Ireland today, we have about 60 literary festivals. And of course, they were completely unprepared for the crisis when it hit. And many of them had no option but to act immediately and to decide that they couldn't go ahead. On the graph there on the right, I present 52 literary festivals that should have taken place between March and December 2020. And of those 52, 32 cancelled or postponed. I'm not going to break down which cancelled or which postponed, because actually it was quite difficult to work out what postponed actually meant in this particular context. 20 then went at least partially or to a large part or even wholly online. As we're looking into 2021, a majority of these 60 literary festivals in Ireland have a plan to return online, but some, I'm not sure, some seem dormant. Some it's difficult to know what 2021 will hold for them. Of course, this pandemic has affected countries differently, and in Ireland we have been experiencing very tight public health guidelines over extensive periods. So really gatherings of people to any extent, you know, and I mean beyond 10 people, have really, really been limited. And so we're seeing this devastating effect here. So whatever I say from now on, we have to remember this slide. There has been a huge amount of devastation in this literary festival sector in Ireland in 2020. In terms of solutions, it was the pivot to the digital space, and of course there's no surprise there. This was the solution to getting through 2020 and probably getting through, I would think, virtually all of 21. So I now turn to think about what does this digital experience, this shift to digital space mean then? I think in the first instance, it definitely does yield multiple opportunities once festivals acquire the necessary confidence, capabilities and resources. So over the last X number of months in 2020, we've seen a great variety in the creative responses among literary festivals in Ireland. So core was the idea of staying true to the festival mission. A great deal of emphasis was this attachment to sticking true to what the festival actually existed to do, and on maintaining in some shape or form engagement with audiences. And so, of course, we see now literary festivals becoming, in effect, broadcasters, live streaming in ways that allow some sort of engagement with audiences, and then simply broadcasting. We see them offering supports to train their audiences on how to access digital, because as I move to threats, one of the threats, of course, is that we may see some audiences marginalized in this digital arena. We see them trying to maintain some degree of physicality. So, for example, the Dublin Book Festival pre-recorded some of its events in regular venues, so as at least to give the audiences a sense of the normal festival. They worked with authors, and of course authors are a huge component, of course, of literary festivals, and the extent to which they were prepared and able and willing to move online was a big factor here. Festivals like Towers and Tales in Listowel worked with authors to pre-record materials and to provide some materials for audiences and make them available online. Interestingly, others like Waterford Writers' Weekend commissioned work that encouraged artists to reflect on the host place during the pandemic and then to turn that into their work. I think in Ireland, confidence was a huge thing, and a lot of credit has to go to the very important literary festival Coach, which happens in Galway City. It was at the very early stages here. They were due to kick off in April. They launched their programme as normal 3 days before lockdown hit. And so they had very little time to pivot, which they did very effectively, streaming for free a good portion of its planned programme on its YouTube channel. And all artists were paid, working to the Arts Council's motto of all artists must be paid. And of course, this was a big issue in the very early days. Should material be put out for free? What was the costing to be? How was revenue to be generated? How were people to be paid? That's a big issue going forward. And so now we've had festivals spend an entire 12 months in this pandemic context, working it out, undergoing a stiff, huge learning curve. And of course, the pandemic has acted as an enormous catalyst, as Guido has said, for this pivot to the digital platforms, where we are likely to see a huge amount of festival activity going forward. And there are many opportunities. So for a start, really, obviously, we're reading that more people are reading in general during the pandemic, because let's face it, what else have we got to do? If we think about the festival as something that happens in a very time-bound manner, I think we can start to see now that time takes on completely new dimensions in digital space. So we see the activity of the festival stretching beyond the normal little moment of the festival, whether it be a weekend or a week or 10 days. And here I give some examples of Court, for example, creatively introducing new ways of maintaining audience engagement, but in effect, it's changing the nature of festival activity, shifting it out beyond the normal festival time. And they weren't the only festival to do that. So festivals started also to programme outside festival time. So West Cork Literary, for example, they happen in July, but they introduced online events for spring 21 in an attempt to maintain a presence and to maintain audience engagement. Going digital, of course, brings into focus the life beyond of work. So it's not just that something happens and it's over, but now it's very much recorded and it stays in an archive. It can be podcast, it can be accessed after. It also breaks down the distinction between the moment of the festival and the process that goes into making that festival and that piece of literary art that is presented in the festival. So that's a distinction now that we see happening. So we're seeing this breakdown of the extraordinary festival time and the ordinary scheduled cultural program as festivals start to engage in these other kinds of activities. We're seeing all kinds of festivals doing this. So Listowel over in Westport, they devised a poetry walking trail. And as an example of extending that time idea. The Ennis Book Club turns their work into podcasts. Space also takes on a new dimension. Of course, as Guido has very graphically shown us, we are seeing festivals increasing their audience size and reach hugely. Smaller festivals in particular now have the opportunity that they never had before to connect with international artists whom they could never have afforded perhaps to physically brought over. So we had Wexford Literary Festival bringing in New York-based Colin McCann, for example. Also, it gives us new ways of working with partners. So the Limerick Literary Festival, for example, only very recently, a few weeks ago, live streamed an event staged at the Irish Cultural Centre in Paris in collaboration with the French Embassy in Dublin. So it gives all kinds of new possibilities for collaborative working and producing. In a sense, it builds entirely new communities in space. So we have last year the Bloomsday event in June, the day that James Joyce's Ulysses is set on. Here we have Drina Gallagher talking about how Bloomsday turned into Zoomsday. And James Joyce enthusiasts the world over were doing James Joycean things all over the world together on Zoom. So and here, of course, is this communal idea that we so attach importance to in the festival context, having a new form online. But there are a series of threats, I think, that need to be taken into account. So from a festival perspective, some questions. So if all literary festivals can now be accessed digitally from anywhere, well, then how will the smaller ones maintain their distinctiveness, such as that I, the literary enthusiast, will bother to go see them because I've already seen every artist that I care to see, in some of the bigger festivals. So will smaller festivals be undermined or under threat, I wonder? Is there a possibility now that we might see more standardized, more serial homogenized content altogether anybody can be brought in to any festival at any time in any place? I think these are big questions. And then this one I've already mentioned. I mean, how exactly are we going to generate revenue, pay the artists, cover costs, all of that? I think that's a huge question. For authors, these are hugely related questions. So, authors, their exposure. I mean, why do authors go to festivals? What's their purpose? Will they now get greater exposure at going to fewer festivals? So does that mean they will go to fewer festivals? And what does that mean for income generation? I think these are questions that might be picked up later on. As a geographer, of course, I'm interested in place. And some of our festivals, we heard them speak about the loss for place. So some festivals are very rooted in place and are very much about the place. And if we go digital, how are we going to maintain that individuality, that particularity, that atmosphere, that place connectedness? I'm thinking of the Bars House Festival of Writing and Ideas, for example. And then the reputational loss, how can they compete then in the bigger sphere? And then for people or audiences or literary enthusiasts, lots of questions. I mean, do we worry, for example, about potentially excluding some cohorts? Older people, perhaps, who are not as digitally literate as others, people who live in geographically peripheral areas, whom broadband is not as good as it is in urban areas. Have we concerns around that? And then this core connectedness idea that I think Julia was hinting at, the communal dimension, the sense of community that literary festivals generate for the people who often return to them year on year. What about the networking? What about those social and cultural gains that are to be made by being in the same room as other people? And then if we just think about it from an experience point of view, Mulders, Hidden and Rutten start to talk about, this experience of festivals comes from the ephemeral nature. And I suppose what I was saying earlier on, I'm almost there, Nicole, was that ephemerality is now changing. So I wonder, is the festival experience going to change if it goes into digital space? And this excitement, this buzz, this atmosphere, what's going to happen? I do think, though, that we're into the future and digital space is where we're at. We're into a new hybrid future. Even if we can return to physicality, I think there's so many positives. This hybrid delivery will not be lost. Lots of opportunities, but diverse implications that need thought. And they, of course, depend on the festival. Lots and lots of different factors: size, scale, how long they've been around, their reputation, their resourcing, their abilities and capabilities to go online. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Porenoenelegge. That was excellent timekeeping, right on time. So we switch now to Dr. Miriam Johnson. As I said, excited to see you because I've never met you before. And I've been at Brookes now about a year, so welcome.
Thank you very much. I've been at Brookes for what I feel like is forever and a day, because I did a master's there, but I also haven't been at Brookes for a full year now is the situation. Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about literary festivals, social media, and the move to digital. And you will have to forgive me. I'm going to talk hard and fast because there's quite a lot to get through, and I could easily natter on about this for hours on end. So sit back, buckle up, and get ready to get a lot of information. I wasn't really going to talk about the hybrid nature of festivals because every festival that I spoke to, and this is kind of a case study of around 8 festivals, big and small across the UK, because Dr. Bernadette Quinn just did a really good job explaining, and we've heard quite a lot of good info about how festivals might want to go online and keep a hybrid system. Every festival that I spoke to all say they plan to do this in the coming year, keep some element of the hybrid. So we can't talk about social media and festivals without talking a little bit about social media. So let's do that. Social media data I get here is from We Are Social Digital Report 2021, and it's a really good example of holistic data on social media. I recommend spending some time with it. So January 2020, there were 3.71 billion social media users across the world, and then just a year later, 4.2 billion social media users. That's a lot. In fact, that is 53.6% of the entire world population that uses social media. That's up 13% from last year. In the UK, that's 77.9% of the population uses social media, and 98.8% of that population accesses social media on their mobile phones or tablet devices. So that's the context for it. We need to look more closely at some specific platforms. And we're going to look at 3 here today because those are the ones that the festivals that I spoke to had the most presence on. And I think they're kind of ubiquitous. Facebook. So as I said, it was the one most used by festivals. The highest likes across the festivals I spoke to was 10,204, and the highest follower number was 10,640. The average likes were there on screen, and the smaller festivals brings it down a little bit. And if you don't know, the difference between a like and a follower is a like is a person who's chosen to attach their name to a page as a fan, and a follower is someone who wants to keep up with that page and its information, but doesn't want to call themselves a fan, as it were. So Facebook is a really good platform for the festivals because it is the most used social media platform worldwide, and therefore their audience is likely to have some kind of presence on it. There's a little male symbol there because as every time I talk about social media, I can't help but talk about gender, because the gender balance in how we use social platforms matters in how the people interact on those platforms. That's all I'm going to say about that. But 56% of Facebook users are male, and the highest numbers of users are between the ages of 18 and 34. And however, most posts and comments and likes are by women, even though it's mostly male. So males and men may be lurkers on this platform. And the age of interaction on the site, they go up from the gender of the site. So my mom and dad are less likely to be on Facebook than I am, but they are more likely to engage and interact on Facebook, which kind of replicates what we see in the festival world. So quickly moving on to Twitter, before I can move on to some more holistic things that I found. All but one festival that I spoke to used Twitter in both a general capacity and specifically during the festival. Many of them had groups of volunteers that were digitally assigned to go to events, to live tweet them, to tweet about them beforehand, to say, hey guys, this event's starting in 10 minutes, can't wait to see you there, here's the link, and so forth. And now, none of the festivals I spoke to have the following numbers of like the giant festivals, such as the Edinburgh International Book Festival, which has over 66,000 Twitter followers. But that doesn't mean the audiences are any less engaged. And engagement is a really key term that is going to come up again and again, and it was mentioned several times today. But as you see there, Bloody Scotland is doing pretty well, 20,000 followers. They're looking primed to be a small influencer, and maybe they can be picked up to sell us some stuff before long. If you're listening, don't do that. I can tell you why later. So the context of all this is how people use the social. And again, Twitter is 68.5% male, and it has the highest uses between ages of 35 and 49, closely followed by that 25 to 34 age group. And in both groups, men are actually the highest users. And generally speaking, men use social media across the board more until they hit the age of 54, and then women just barely eke out a bit more use. And the laughing emoji is there because it is the most commonly used emoji on Twitter. And I find that a fun fact that if nothing else, you could take that away and tell your friends and family. So if we quickly look at Facebook, Instagram here. Instagram is the one that we look at that is the majority female. When it comes to that, it is just slightly female, 50.8%, and skews heavily to the 18 to 34-year-old market range, which probably surprised no one here. 6 out of 8 festivals I spoke to did use that. The average numbers of posts was a lot lower than I expected it to be for some festivals that have been established for several years, and Instagram has been online for several years. But the average Instagram post generally has 0.8%, 0.85% engagement. There's that word again. Keep it in mind as we move forward and look at stuff about how they use social media. So I looked at a few key elements when doing this research, and I'll go through some here. The first is how social was used. As you can see from the first quote, it was used to share information on the festival and events. And they say, we posted, Twitter and Facebook posted the links and used these channels to update fans about technical issues as well. We also answered queries directly in the direct messages of functions about the platforms, including dealing with technical issues if and when they came up. They'd use it obviously to remind followers that events were happening, when they were happening, that they can see them later. And some went through other Facebook groups that were not part of the festival and kind of dropped in the interesting events to say, hey, your users might be interested in this, come online and have a look. But they also used their authors to promote events, which in turn acted as promotion for the festival itself. And some authors, as you can imagine, did better at this than others. And one festival said, if we post something on social media, it will very occasionally absolutely sell. But if we send out a database email, there's a much higher chance that it will sell consistently. So just by having a strong social following does not mean that you will get ticket sales or engagement. But it also doesn't hurt to get bums on digital seats either. So, however, some festivals did realize that connection of having a lot of followers and them sharing it and people actually coming to events. Because if you have PewDiePie at an event and he has 50 million YouTube viewers, if 1% of his viewers show up, that's more than a full house, which is great. And a lot of festivals said they were going to keep this in mind in the coming years for the digital elements of their festivals. So if we look at more closely at the audience, and this was mentioned a couple of times today, they were more international than usual because people can physically get there. Sterling said people would physically come, and they mostly noticed American visitors who would come and engage on Twitter in live time and Facebook throughout the year. And they were very pleased with this. And the quote about the single mom was really fascinating. She said, the festival director went on to say, the factor that a single mom can now sit in an evening and feel a part of a club, her book club, without having to pay 30 quid for a babysitter, 20 quid to get there, and 10 quid for a ticket and so forth. And because if someone's going to go through all that expense to get a babysitter coming out because it's expensive, it's got to be something they really, really want to come to. Whereas if it's available on Zoom, they've got a real opportunity to attract them in, because it's not as much effort to sit down with Zoom in your living room, have a glass of wine, tell the kids to be quiet, give them an iPad, etc. I may have ad-libbed that bit about the iPads and so forth. So with all of this, this term kept coming up quite a lot, diversity. And when I say diversity, I don't just mean diversity of skin color. I mean diversity of class, diversity of age, diversity of gender. So much unseen diversity comes into this. And Jericho Ryder said, we sold over 1,150 tickets in 36 countries worldwide and a number of bursary places. They had a far bigger international audience. And as we heard from Bernadette, some festivals were able to get authors in from different parts of the world that normally wouldn't come to their event. Because one of the things that we have to be aware of, and this was also mentioned by Bernadette, is the inequality of access. It's not just inequality of access to the festivals or to the social media, but it's also about having the money to have the tech, the time to use it, the mental capacity, your education to use it, and everything that surrounds that. And we often think that putting something online and makes it accessible because it is more widely available, but accessibility and availability are potentially two very different things which need to be kept in mind. And what happens when we start talking on social media about the festivals and the authors we love, we often get social echo chambers. And in several of the interviews I did, this came up as a topic. And Corleone et al. Has a really good explanation of this. Is echo chambers are where your social media channels just seek to reinforce your views. It's the same stuff you believe told to you over and over again. And you've got to be really careful that your program stands on its own and doesn't have to rely on social media, and that you are able to reach new and distinct audiences by sharing on social media and get out of that echo chamber, because that is how you diversify and grow your festival. Now, these are some stats that came from Henley Lit Fest. They very helpfully posted them on their Instagram or Facebook pages, so I nicked those. And it's really hard to tell how many people viewed particular items online, because people can watch together. You can have 10 people in a room and one screen, people multi-screen. So it's really hard to be able to pin it down to one person, one screen watching. And I have mentioned audience engagement many times, because audience engagement, in short, has long been at the center of professional and scholarly attention, says Mo, Pol, and Van Dijk. It wasn't at the center of my talk today. I kept kind of poking it out there, but perhaps it probably should be, because it's all about community and social communities, bringing people together and developing ways for festivals to consider their audiences and communicate with them in order to know what works for them and what they need to get out of this. Which brings in the idea of, there's a question about reach versus engagement. Engagement was mentioned by everyone I spoke to. It's another way, they said it's another way of allowing people to engage with the festival. It's not necessarily just watching it back on YouTube. And as Bloody Scotland said, they had American visitors who were actively engaged in various social media platforms. Another festival said it felt as if sharing content was happening simultaneously to the festival, which meant that increase in time sharing and engaging. And the audience was engaging in real time. And we may feel that people have clicked and engaged with the festival through knowing or following the speakers. So it's really important to think about the engagement. And the slide you see here is a lovely example of some of the engagement that came during the festival times for the festivals that I looked at across all of their social channels. I obviously didn't pull the images off Instagram. So here's the question I'm going to leave you with today. Engagement is all well and good if we have access to social, which could potentially be an echo chamber if we're not careful. But how do we define engagement? What does that mean in context of the festivals and communities they give rise to, both online and offline? And how are they going to harness and support that going forward when we can start doing hybrid or face-to-face events again? Thank you very much. Probably under time there. I have no idea.
You are under time, 2 minutes under time. So that leaves us with more time for questions. And I've got a hard one here. So I'll probably pose this to both Dr. Quinn and Dr. Johnson. The first question was about, I don't know if you see it or you've seen it, was about this pivot being a threat, the pivot to virtual. I know you touched on it in your presentation, Dr. Quinn. So the person's asking or making the point that it's more difficult now for festivals to distinguish themselves when digital content is so accessible. So what both of you might want to do, rather than just answering that question about digital being a threat, you might want to pose some solutions to the problem.
So asking for solutions to the problem is just cheating. I guess my solution would be that the danger is to let the threat overwhelm you, because if you want to move forward in the future, whether you like it or not, there's a caveat here. You have to be able to harness social media and the power of technology in some way that works for your specific festival. The caveat is, if your specific festival is come to our tiny literary festival on an island off the coast of Scotland where we have no Wi-Fi and we hand deliver letters to tell you to come to an event, then social media might not work, and the actual digital nature of it.
Your thoughts, Dr. Quinn?
I mean, I think that there are threats on the horizon, but overall, I genuinely don't see it in a negative sense. I mean, I think this is a moment of change, and I think I meant to say, you know, that many literary festivals were already in this digital space already. This is a moment of change, and I think festivals will have to move with this context. And I mean, I don't see. I mean, I think hybrid is where we're going. I don't see an eradication of the physical festival. So I don't think this is a moment of panic. I think it is a moment to avail of opportunities. I think a lot of festivals were surprised. I think they were really surprised by what going digital did for them. And once they actually managed to grasp and to start delivering in terms of the extended reach of the audience, for example, and in terms of the possibilities that gave them. So I think a positive, I would be positive going forward, definitely.
The second question I have is for Dr. Johnson, and it's about whether you feel that local authorities should be funding literary festivals. Do you think funding should go towards these literary festivals, and specifically how much should go to funding the access to technology, because it's a barrier for some smaller book festivals?
I definitely think there should be funding for these things, but book festivals and literary festivals and all sorts of festivals I think would be really valuable if it were funded. And I could go on about how funding is wasted in the UK in a variety of ways. But that being said, there is a lot of good funding out there. And I have lost the question to finish answering it. Let me bring it up. There we go. So yeah, it would be really good. I would have to get the central government onto that, which is a bit harder. And because I think it allows people to engage, it will help with reading, it will help with education levels, etc. There's a lot of really valuable stuff, especially if the program factors in children into it, and a huge variety of them do, so you can provide educational aspects. And how much do I think access to technology is and will be a barrier? I think it can be a bit of a barrier, but what I found with speaking to literary festivals is that it's more a mental barrier. So it's, oh gosh, we have to move everything online. I feel like we're starting the festival anew again. How do we do this? What do we do? And then they got to grips with it, and then it started to get a lot easier. That being said, if you are going to set up cameras and rent venues that you can do something with really high, like slick specs and technology and so forth, yes, it will cost more money. And so perhaps there should be a budget as well for smaller festivals to make that happen.
Nicole, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Dr. Quinn, I go to you with this question about the current crisis being something that would be something to make festival organizers collaborate more going forward.
I think that's a really good question, and I think that's going to be a positive development. I think there's a huge potential for festivals to collaborate. Sorry, just in preparation for thinking about that question, something came into my mind that we haven't mentioned yet: sustainability. I think this is a real positive going forward. Digital can help us reduce the negative impact on the environment. It's going to reduce transport, for example. It can reduce costs in lots of different ways. And I think collaboration and sharing artists, for example. And I mean, thinking of Miriam's example of the isolated, Scottish island. I mean, I think that there's all kinds of ways that different places can be brought into a festival, filming a production in one particular place, which can then be shown somewhere else in a kind of a satellite and hub kind of idea through collaboration between partners of all kinds. I had just one tiny example there, so absolutely. And I think that's just, the limit to collaboration is just the limits to people's imagination.
So I think we are up on our time, but I'll give you all the final question. I don't know who wants to go with it. It's kind of a twofer. Will we be swapping quantitative economic measurements with digital engagement figures when we are measuring, the reach of literary festivals? And will this become a selling point or case to support many festivals? Might we see less of an emphasis on economic impact?
I don't know is the answer, but I mean, I don't know about the UK, but in Ireland, it can be quite difficult to get data on festivals. And at least once festivals go online, there is data because audiences book online. So we immediately get data that we didn't necessarily have before. So I think that's a plus. And we're going to be able to learn a huge amount of information from that data, which we could actually use in lots of different ways to understand economic impact or to understand any kind of impact. So I think that's good. I'll pass over to Miriam.
Yeah, several of the festivals I spoke to said actually it was really, though it was hard to know how many people were watching a screen, they knew exactly how many people had booked tickets, where the tickets had been booked from the geolocators, etc., if they had those capabilities. And so I think that is really useful. And again, how valuable, if we have to decide how we're going to measure reach or how we're going to define reach. So is that engagement? Is that people showing up? Is reach better because we got someone from Alaska tuning in rather than 10 people from down the road? Will it become a selling point? It could do. Will it become less of an emphasis on economic impact? Perhaps. And again, that all comes down to how you're going to define reach and engagement and what matters most to perhaps the funders or the festival itself and how it's organized as a system.
Can I just come back in really quickly, just to pick up and support what Miriam said there? I mean, I think it comes, what we heard festivals saying was, their mission really mattered. And so for some of them, extending their audience reach actually wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't what they wanted. They wanted a different kind of, they wanted an engagement with particular cohorts. It wasn't about numbers. So it comes back to the festival, I think, and their mission. Thank you.
I'm going to close it here because we're supposed to take our tea break. So I'll invite the presenters to actually have a look at the remaining questions. And maybe you might want to type up your thoughts to answer these questions during the tea break. So thank you. That was a wonderful session. I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Thank you very much, Nicole and Miriam and Bernadette. And so we now have a 15-minute break for you to put the kettle on. In the chat, I put a couple of questions as part of the networking. So do share with everybody from which part of the UK or which country you're joining us. And can you name any literary festivals you particularly enjoyed? And Julia has another task we might ask you to do as well. So I'll hand over to Julia.
Yes, thank you, Angus. We are going also to, as networking activity, use menti.com. So we'll explain you how to do so. I'm going to write in the chat, I'm going to post the link to menti.com and a code that you are going to use. So 1 minute. So I post in the chat the link to menti.com. If you click on the link, it asks you to add a voting code. So you can copy and paste the voting code. And now I'm going to share my screen. That's great. So people are already replying. So the first question is, how many virtual hybrid literary festivals have you attended in the last 12 months? We have another question, so you can leave the menti.com open for the other question. Right, so okay, we have 35% none, 26% 1, 16 2, 10 3, but we also have 6% more than 15. So let's have a look at the second question. How would you describe your experience of virtual literary festivals in 3 adjectives?
We're getting some responses also in the chat about where people are from Stirling in Scotland, from Brazil, and Bournemouth. So that's quite a wide-ranging selection of locations. And there's been mention of Salisbury Literary Festival and Frankfurt Book Fair. Suzanne from Sissinghurst, someone from Latvia now. Portland, Oregon, in the States, and the Bienal do Livro in Brazil is mentioned. So Stanza Poetry Festival. So do keep your contributions coming in the chat. Mention of Festival Writing Ideas in Boris, Belfast Book Festival, Cheltenham Festival, and someone from Cowley in Oxford. So we're reaching the other parts of Oxford away from Headington.
It's interesting here, Angus, as well, to see the adjective. So interesting, apparently, is the more shared one, but also community, intimate, accessible, engaging, exactly as Miriam and Bernadette were saying. It's interesting, again, enjoyable, fun, and educational. So loads of adjectives here.
We've got a call out for the Bergen International Literary Festival in Norway, someone in Whitney in Oxfordshire. Oh, we found someone in Headington, our local area, in Oxford. We've got a message from Dubai recommending the Emirates Literary Festival. The Edinburgh International Book Festival is recommended. A colleague from Woodstock in Oxfordshire has called in. We've got someone from Germany also on the call as well. So wide-ranging set of locations and book festivals, and we can summarise that afterwards, after the event as well, when we do the notes. Oh, now someone recommending festival in Lillehammer. Okay, the Cowley I thought was in Oxford, but it turns out to be near Exeter in Devon. Angus in Scotland, yes, please. Thank you for mentioning where you are. And particularly enjoyed Edinburgh Book Festival. Someone says the Nicola Sturgeon interview of Bernardine Evaristo, very good. Someone recommending the John Steinbeck Festival of Literature, Music and Film. A wide set of responses. A call out for the Cheltenham Literary Festival now. Ways with Words, which operates in Cumbria, Southwold and Dartington in Devon.
It's interesting here also, somebody pointed out no travel. So for virtual literary festivals, really they felt the travel element was missing. But we also have somebody pointing out it kind of like as an immersive experience. And again, we keep seeing the educational and engaging element very, very important, almost kind of at the same level. And again, the community, the social aspect of the experience as well.
And someone is loving the Scottish representation, to which Miriam replies, Scotland is great. To which we all agree. Oh, now we've got a shout out for loving the Norwegian representation. Norway is great. Oh, yep, now the Irish. We should mention the Irish. Yes, please. It's going a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest now. Thank you on behalf of Norway. We have the results of the Finnish jury. Don't forget Germany. We will never forget Germany. Oh, okay, another couple of suggestions. I Write Book Festival and Ullapool Book Festival are two of my favourites. The chat is going quiet. People must be drinking their cups of tea now.
Yes, I will stop sharing this now, and so we can start our industry panel.
So we hand over to Sarah Franklin, who is chairing this next session. Welcome, Sarah. You are from the Oxford International Centre for Publishing as well.
I am indeed. Thank you, Angus. It's very nice to be here. Hello, everybody. So I have the delightful task of chairing this roundtable discussion, and I'm going to start by just going through the biographies of the four panelists that we have, or the four sort of people. This is people who organise literary festivals, so lots of good expertise here. Let me just start, and we'll see everybody's there already. So Sally Dunsmore, who's the festival chief executive and director at the FT Weekend Oxford Literary Festival, which she co-founded in 1997. Feels to me there must be some kind of huge anniversary coming up quite soon then, Sally. And it's the most prestigious, distinguished public cultural event staged at any university in the world. That's an amazing thing, isn't it? She's also the festival director and co-founder of Blenheim Palace Festival of Literature, Film and Music here in Oxfordshire as well. And at the request of the government of Gibraltar, she established the first Gibraltar International Literary Festival in 2013. I was director for 3 years and has been consultant to the event ever since. And Sally started her career in publishing and obviously has sort of graduated to become a very strong expert in literary festivals. Michela Zinn, bear with me while I find Michela. Michela Zinn is the director of the Porenoenelegge, somebody please correct my horrific Italian if that was wrong, foundation, which organises, oh good, I get another chance to say it, the Porenoenelegge Festival. The festival was founded in 2000 when she was working in the local Chamber of Commerce dealing with the promotion of the area. And today the foundation is a cultural agency that works throughout the year on national and international projects related to the world of books. So an example of a festival that's sort of grown into something even bigger for the community. Julianne Mooney is director for the Dublin Book Festival. She has worked with Dublin Book Festival since 2010. It's one of Ireland's largest book festivals, showcasing Ireland's writers, illustrators, poets and publishers since 2006. And then our final panellist today is Catherine Moylan, who's a senior lecturer at Munster Technological University in the southwest of Ireland. And Catherine qualified as a chartered accountant and decided to lecture in the areas of finance, entrepreneurship and corporate governance. She's a native of Listowel and has previously volunteered with local marketing and tourist organisations to promote the area and its literary heritage. So she began volunteering at the Listowel Writers' Week in 2014 and became chairperson of it in 2019. Listowel Writers' Week was due to celebrate its 50th year in 2020. That's amazing. But took the decision to postpone the festival due to COVID-19. This year, it plans to deliver a virtual festival with hopes to return to a physical festival as soon as circumstances allow, which I think is a brilliant way, Catherine, of saying, we have no idea what's going to happen. We will do it. I think we should all be saying from now on, as soon as circumstances allow, for more or less everything. Right, so welcome to our speakers. And I know that you've been sent these questions in advance, and I will explain to the listeners that I have versions of, so I have the English translations of Michela's questions, and Michela will sort of become involved if we get beyond these questions. If not, then I will read her answers to the questions. First question, what were the main challenges that literary festivals faced during the lockdown and are still facing today because of COVID? So Julianne, if you'd like to start.
Hi. I guess there's the main challenge for us in March 2020. I mean, the world faced, something we'd never seen before. And we were in planning stages for the festival. And I think, I know Dr. Quinn talked about the uncertainty. So it was just the publishers, the writers, the industry. Nobody knew where we'd be in Dublin Book Festival's November. So our biggest challenge was, and still even for 2021, was what do we do? How do we plan? How do we, do we plan a festival and then pull it online last minute? So I was very much of the mind that nothing's really going to change. With the vaccine won't be out by November, and I wanted to provide certainty. So I wanted to give our audience certainty that we would be somehow alive and we'd be keeping going. I wanted to give certainty to the authors, especially debut authors, that they, their books were coming out, their launches were cancelled, book tours were cancelled. So I wanted to give them and the publishers certainty. So we, in very early stages, started planning. And so the biggest challenge was, what do we do? How do we present our festival? I know a lot of festivals are looking at this for 2021. I would say that looking at your core values, what do you want to do? What's really important to the festival? For us, it's showcasing Ireland's amazing writers and authors and our publishers as well. So we went online and we knew, I suppose that was your challenge. So how do we bring a festival online? What platform do you use? What's going to work? What happens if the internet goes down? So there's so many different questions. I would say look into the different technologies. What I did was I sat down and I watched lots of different festivals and I chose the platform that I really liked as an audience member. So I then managed to get a team around me that, I can't even post on Facebook. So, that was kind of, something I needed a team around me that would be able to support me in that way. And then it was also another challenge is how to stand out from the crowd. How do you not be online and using all the same authors that with digital, that is a huge issue that, you might plan for an author being in November, but they've done 10 digital events by the time they get to yours. And that is, I don't think you can really get around that, but it was something to keep in mind. So for me, we work with venues throughout Dublin and my heart was broken for them. They had these empty rooms. So we kind of chose a period when we thought things would be a lot better, which was during kind of August, September. And we decided to pre-record, get broadcast quality events and put them online. So it was almost that I didn't want it to be a series of Zooms. We had time to plan, and using a budget we would have used for kind of venue hire and other ways, we were able to pull that money in and we pre-recorded. So it was still showcasing our venues and working with them, but also bringing people into, you know, kind of lulling you into the full sense that you are actually at an event. So that was in itself had a lot of challenges, but I think it really paid off to have the broadcast quality events mixed in with your podcasts and Zoom style events. And I guess the other challenge is, are people going to be tired and exhausted of online events? And you just, you know, you have to go with it. You have to find new ways of engagement. I know that has been discussed, how to engage the audience, make them feel part of the event. We ran different things on social media and our blog posts in advance. We knew who was going to be on our program, so we would put out like a short article or an interview by an author, and then we said to our audience, send us your questions for them. You know, tell us ask the questions you really would love to ask at an event. And so we would save some of those questions for during an event. And the chat function is really, really important. So that was kind of getting around some of the problems with the engagement.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm sort of struck as well by the fact that it sounds like, you know, you're in Ireland for Ireland in that respect. So I know that the festival often has people who have come from, you know, other places, you know, also who've come from overseas. Did you really sort of focus on this being an Irish thing? You know, was that part of what you did to differentiate?
Well, it's part of, I suppose, Dublin Book Festival. It was originally set up in 2006 by the publishers in Ireland, and they wanted to showcase of the authors that just, you know, weren't getting a chance to kind of get out there, get at festivals. It tended to be a lot of the big names and international names. So this was an opportunity for a lot of the publishers are one-man bands, and this is their opportunity to get those writers out there and to get their names out there. So for us, it was also an amazing opportunity to give those authors and publishers the chance to kind of, you know, a bit wider audience, the international audience that we wouldn't generally have. And we would have groups that would come back from, you know, from France and Amsterdam and Germany and America, but we had huge engagement over in the US, which we've never had before. So that was really exciting.
That's amazing. I mean, I suppose it's a real opportunity for something like that for, you know, for you. So it's fabulous. Thank you, Julianne.
Thank you.
We've got lots of answers to hear. So Sally Dunsmore, if I could call on you next, that would be terrific. So the question was, what are the main challenges that literary festivals faced during lockdown and are still facing now? Sally here? Yes, there, Sally. Sally, you're muted, I think. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect, yes.
Yeah, lovely. So we were in the unfortunate position that we had to cancel our festival 2 weeks prior to its start. And I was sat here thinking, goodness me, are we going to get in? Are we just going to squeeze in as the way indeed the Cheltenham races did? And we didn't. And I think actually on reflection, it was a good thing we didn't. Otherwise, we could have been responsible for passing on infections through gatherings. So it was rather scary. We were able to pay, financially it was very scary. We were able to pay all our suppliers. We weren't able to refund people their tickets because, like most businesses around the world, income is used to help support your business. So we had to communicate very honestly and truthfully to our audiences and explain the situation and explain that we would be back and that we would be offering credits on tickets at future events. Most people were very sympathetic, and a lot of our audience actually donated some of their tickets money to us, which was absolutely fantastic. We had massive support by our writers and our sponsors, who all pledged to continue supporting us ongoingly, and indeed in the public in the way I've just described. The funny thing was, it takes a year to put this thing together. It took me a week to unravel it all. It's extraordinary. then there's the point, what do we do afterwards? It's kind of, I noticed that everybody was, we'll probably talk about this later on, Zoom is obviously in digital marketing has come up hugely in the last discussions, but given we only had 2 weeks for a live event, I decided at that point to resist Zooming, which goes very much against the grain. Partly for the problems with refunds of tickets and how we managed that messaging. And we had a lot of work to do to sort all that out. Ongoingly, I thought I would be lucky enough and I'd be able to put on a couple of evening events in May. Then I'd have 4 days in November. Then we'd be back now at our 10-day festival, which is our usual time slot when the first in spring. And then I thought that's not going to happen. We'll have a 9 days in the summer, all of which was abandoned as the COVID-19 news ebbs and flows. So we've now decided to, and we've made this announcement as of yesterday, to have a series of one-off events from the autumn onwards, a couple of weekends and evening events leading up to our usual time slot of 10 days in March next year. God willing, that will happen. Hopefully it will with the vaccine turnout. So it's not been easy, but what it did do, I think, one of the things that was rather wonderful that it gave us was the gift of time. So there hasn't been a great deal to do over the last 12 months. And what we want to do with it, how we want to develop it, and also time to develop an educational program, which we've never had time to do. We're a very, very small team. There's about half of us, but full time. The rest of people coming on a project basis as and when required. So we've done a number of applications to a series of trusts and foundations to get the money to develop this educational program, which includes 5 initiatives. That would not have happened had COVID not happened. So if something good can come out of it, hopefully that will be a good result out of it.
That's so interesting, Sally. So actually, this is something that will have sort of long-term impact. And, given that our interval people on Mentimeter were saying that, learning was one of the big things that they, that they really enjoyed from festivals, you've actually been able to take that opportunity of the sort of the enforced sort of stop to reinvent in a little way.
Yes, absolutely. It gave us that time, and that was very helpful, actually.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, and kudos to you for seeing such a silver lining. And what I can't think how that must have been. 2 weeks out.
It was a bit sad, but what was going on was so awful and so huge that I think everybody was very much affected by it. So you couldn't really take it personally. This thing has affected so many people, and we've many people to thank for our vaccines. I had mine yesterday, and also for the fact that our businesses, our work, and our festivals hopefully will all be back on track because of the people in the NHS and these marvellous people who produce these vaccines. So there is good coming out of it.
Well, that's a commendable approach as well, to just think, to sort of look at it in context and think, if this is the worst that happens to me, then I'm one of the lucky ones, sort of thing. So, I commend that. But and it's amazing to think back to this time last year. Now we're all completely au fait with Zoom conferences and events, and we live half our lives like this. And I think we're going to go back to waving at people when we're back in real life because we're so used to doing that. But you were right at the forefront of we didn't have that collective vocabulary for working online in the same way that festivals that maybe came 6 months later were able to sort of just plug into.
Yes. And I think for us, we made the right decision not to Zoom. Because it sounds a bit negative, but I think there's so much Zooming. Picking up what Julianne was saying, how do you actually produce a lot of writers who perhaps saying all the same things in different Zoom contexts for different festivals doing Zooming? That is a real challenge. I don't know how you overcome that at all. And I felt there was a lot out there. Maybe we just needed to be quiet and we didn't need to add to that conversation. It goes against the grain. It's not the modern view, I know, but that's what we are going to do. We haven't done is we'll start streaming as of autumn next year, most of our events. So that'll be
well, that's super interesting, actually, isn't it? That this works better, and I think because you explained within the context of if you're asking people to hold on to credit for their tickets, but
Yes,
then you
indeed.
offer an alternative, you know, it just gets messy, I would have thought.
Indeed, it's very complicated, and we wanted to be the lines to be very straight, very clear, and people knew where we were. So on our website, if you've looked at it, you'll see notices that we've sent out to our customers, which explains the situation that we simply did not have the money to refund people their tickets.
And you've been going a long time, so you've presumably got, you know, a sort of a quorum of regulars who would really understand that, you know, for whom.
Yes, people have been really kind about it, actually, and very understanding. And that's been very great. It's really reassuring to have that. It's sad, but
fantastic, thank you. Catherine, if I could call on you. So same question, really. What happened because of COVID, more or less?
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, very interesting, actually. Sally, I'd almost forgotten, you reminded me that in Listowel, we also took the time last year maybe to look over the festival over the last 49 years and say, right, now is the time to change. And perhaps there were, I mean, the challenge for us is that in Listowel, the magic of the festival is the intimacy of the town, the community element, the support that we get from locals and local businesses and so on. So for us, I suppose we were really, I think it was maybe 6 weeks before our festival, we had to cancel 75 events. Again, had to contact them with the sad news. I suppose we had to make sure, and for us it was very important that we paid all our artists as well. I know Dr. Quinn, Bernadette mentioned that earlier, and we decided, right, we need to make sure first and foremost that we support the artist throughout this time, because they were affected so badly. You know, the amount of literary festivals that I suppose, you know, pepper the calendar, and all of a sudden they had disappeared. So for us, the fact that we did not have that physical festival, the challenge was, how do we keep the magic, that memory in people's minds? How do we remain on the calendar? So we did little things like maybe even photos of the venues and said, you know, Listowel is missing you, or here's the square, this is where people would sit and have lunch, or, you know, maybe little video clips of or actually videos of past festivals, and said, do you remember this? And remember that, you know, sing song that happened in this pub or this corner in the hotel where people congregate. So keep the memory alive. And that was really important. With regard to, I suppose, the other challenge that we had was funding. Like most festivals, we relied heavily on government funding, but also we have fantastic patrons and sponsors. And in this town, I suppose population is about maybe 4,000. Everybody buys into the festival, so everyone supports it. All the windows are themed with kind of a literary theme throughout the week. So we had to find ways of, I suppose, making sure that we could support them, because they supported us throughout the last couple of decades. So actually, it was a lovely opportunity for some solidarity within the community, in the sense that they were missing this festival. It was probably, one shop said to me that we had an event beside her business premises, and that the week was as busy as Christmas for her. And she said, with the festival gone, you know, that it had a huge impact on her as well. So it gave us a chance to kind of start a discussion with locals, with the community, with other art organisations, the theatre, the cinema here, and said, okay, what can we do together to help one another, help writers, help readers, and help the whole community? So that was a good opportunity. And just thanks to Sally for reminding me of it there, because yeah, over the summer it was one long strategic process and journey, but yeah, it was worth it. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what did you come up with, or can't you tell us?
Yeah, we had a young adult book festival. So along with our main festival, we would always have had a festival for 16 to 17-year-olds in November. And quite often it was kind of, we'll say, school students or students would come and they say, this is absolutely fantastic. And it would be the focus on, I suppose, bringing literature off the page and bringing it to life. So like performance poetry and 6-word stories, and, you know, Shakespeare in a kind of a rap version. And again, just kind of putting it in different, I suppose, having a different angle at it. So we decided that maybe the teachers, I think we're all suffering from a little bit of digital fatigue. So we decided to create resources for teachers and create online, almost kind of little bundles of literary, be it poetry, prose, like English in your school, but then I suppose English, the literary heritage of our town. And so we did that in November. And we also did, had little connections with the audience. So we had a 6-word story. So we put up a little picture and we'd get people on our Facebook page to write a story in 6 words. And they were just, people loved it. And it was great to kind of celebrate that. We'd have every couple of weeks, and little things like Poem of the Week. So for me, I felt that just to ensure that we had a connection with the audience, even if we didn't have a physical festival, that we remained in their minds in some shape or form.
That's wonderful. And do you think some of that will continue sort of even once you're sort of back up and running?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting, actually, even though we know that the USP of our festival is the town and the atmosphere, a lot of people have said to us that I suppose now we are more inclusive. We have an opportunity for greater diversity. And I know that's one of the things we'll be talking about later. But I think there's an opportunity now to reach out to people who may not have been able to attend the festival, but maybe to, I suppose, we've always had an eclectic offering, literary offering in Listowel. So I think now we can expand with hybrid events, expand the reach of that eclectic offering and share the literary love of Listowel a little bit further.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Catherine. I'm just going to read Michela's response here. So the question again, what were the main challenges that literary festivals faced during the lockdown and are still facing today because of COVID? And Michela supplied her answer in Italian, which I'm not going to attempt, but here is the translation. We worked for 20 years to bring thousands of people to our small town in the northeast of Italy. There were 130,000 people in 2019. And suddenly we had to change our strategy and take ourselves to our audience. We did it by transforming our business into online projects and by choosing to create well-structured multimedia products that could live forever, even after the festival or events. We started just a year ago, and we managed to make the September 2020 festival partly in person and partly online. Now we are back to the all online events again, and let's hope for September 2021. Clearly, we hope that as soon as possible, everything will return to in-person events, but it would be anachronistic to aim at the same identical scenarios of the past. The pandemic, in this sense, has allowed us to glimpse new scenarios and reach a wider audience. Thank you, Michela. And I have a question for Michela from this. So I guess Italy at that point was sort of luckier than the UK or Ireland, which I think is in the world's longest lockdown, quite literally. And you were able to have some hybrid festival in September. How did you choose which events to keep online and which ones to make in person? And what percentage was in person compared with online, would you say? I know Giulia's going to translate.
Siccome l'Italia ha avuto il lockdown più lungo d'Europa e siete comunque riusciti ad avere gli eventi in forma ibrida a settembre, e quale percentuale di eventi è stata fatta online e quale percentuale di eventi è stata fatta di persona, e quante persone sono venute in presenza e quante hanno partecipato da remoto?
Allora, diciamo che in presenza ne abbiamo fatto un 30%, il 70% è stato sia in presenza che in forma ibrida.
So the 30% of the manifestation was completely in person, while 70% of the manifestation has been both in person and online.
Per quanto riguarda la presenza degli spettatori, c'erano dei limiti legati proprio dalle normative.
For what concerns the capacity of people that came to the festival, there were some limitations that were imposed by the Italian government.
E quindi i numeri sono stati indubbiamente ridotti, però abbiamo avuto dall'altro canto la possibilità di avere moltissimi spettatori online.
So numbers were of course reduced compared to previous years, but we had also the possibility of having a huge number of people that joined us online.
Oh, fantastic. Sorry. So the events it was the same event, but some of it was streamed online and some of it was in person.
Quindi era lo stesso evento che era sia di persona che online.
Esattamente.
Yeah.
Thank you both. That was fantastic. So I'm conscious of time. We're having such amazing full answers and it's being so interesting that I'm going to skip to the question. We have a couple of questions from our audience, and it would be remiss of me, given that we're talking so much about audience engagement, to not go straight to those and engage our audience. So I'm going to start with, it says Ethos here, that's the name of the person who sent it in, and any advice you would give to events graduates looking to join the literary festival industry? And I'm going to ask Catherine to start. Any thoughts?
I'm delighted to answer this question. I was hoping I'd get the opportunity because we have had several graduates who have volunteered with us over the last couple of years. And in every case so far, the graduate has ended up getting a full-time job from it. Through maybe the network of people that they've met in the Listowel Writers' Week or learning more about the industry. I'd also, just thinking of our current festival manager, actually did a work internship with us. And again, that gave her, I suppose, a very valuable, but also an insight into the festival. So I know sometimes the idea to volunteer, you might think, well, you know, I have a degree in event management, or I have experience and so on and so forth, but even volunteering for a short time can just give you I suppose, your foot in the door. That it's even you'll get to know people within the organization who may be able to create the context that you do need then to get maybe a full-time job elsewhere. But again, from my experience, all our volunteers have really been successful as a result of their period of internship or work with us. So yeah, that's my advice on that one.
Thank you so much. Great advice, and great to know you're going to have everybody knocking down your door now. And you've said that you've already worked with previous graduates. So let's hope we're all allowed over soon and can come and do it. Julianne, any advice from you?
I'd really second what Catherine said there. We would have interns every year. Again, a lot of them might want to get into publishing or festival management, and they will move on to where they want to. I think contact a local festival. You know, even if you're not going for a big literary festival, contact a local festival, do a little bit of volunteer. Most festivals, we rely on volunteers. So every year, it's like, I really miss them this year. We'd have around anything from around 30 to 50 volunteers helping out. And a lot of them have actually then, I see them every day for the 4 days. And a lot of them have then applied for an internship with us, and that's how it started. So I think contact, and especially if it's a festival that you're really interested in, they're always looking for volunteers. And it's a really, really good kind of step towards moving in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Sally, I know that we've certainly our students in the past, when these things are happening, have been very involved and loved their time with the Oxford Literary Festival. But I'm going to ask you the question regardless, even though I've just given half the answer away.
No, I love having students at our festivals. I love young people being around us. They've got an energy that they bring to the thing that is very inspiring. But and there's a can-do attitude that is very infectious. And I'll just give you an example. We had 2 young men who came to help. We were based at Christchurch at the time before we moved into the city more generally in other university venues. And we had abandoned our coffee shop for our festival goers. And it was in a marquee. It was a big mistake, actually. We didn't know this at the time. But the reason we'd abandoned it was money, and B, so many people had moaned about it, all this, dreadful, that. I thought, well, they don't want it, so we'll get rid of it. Well, the uproar was horrendous. People were oozing away. And these 2 young men saved the day. They went and talked to the bursar of Christchurch. They persuaded that woman to give us one of their rooms free. They brought in all the food and all the coffee, and they delivered that cafe. And after 2 days of complaints from members of the public, it simply went away. So that kind of approach and attitude, how can we solve that solution, is for me, is very invaluable when you have people of that quality
That's incredible. And yeah,
and they did. We're not able to really offer jobs because we're such a small team, but we always write references to people that have come, and if there's any support we can give when they're looking for their next role in life, we hope to help in some small way.
Fantastic. So you'd say show initiative, volunteer.
Yes. It's really
go above and beyond when you're in the job.
Yeah.
So, and then you'll get a glowing reference, and and people do. That it seems to me that jobs within literary festivals are few, but they're wonderful when you can get. People do move on from time to time, and they do come.
And of course, there are many different sort of literary festivals. There are literary festivals with music and film. There are other festivals that do a bit of literature. So it's not just strictly literary festivals you can sort of focus on. You can have your book intake through other various festivals as well, who delve into books and writing as part of what they're doing elsewhere.
And I suppose actually, if one were to gain literary experience or experience at literary festivals, then there would be nothing stopping you approaching a festival that doesn't currently have a literary strand and say, I have experience of this and contact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't I set it up? So create your own job sort of thing. Michela, I know you've had a chance to consider the question and Julia's going to translate for you.
Sì, anche noi abbiamo ogni anno circa 200 volontari.
We have every year around 200 volunteers for our festival.
Che si chiamano angeli da noi perché hanno le magliette gialle con disegnate le ali sulle spalle.
That we call angels because they wear yellow t-shirts with wings drawn in the back of the t-shirts.
E noi chiediamo proprio loro di essere presenti quando servono, però di stare in disparte quando non è fondamentale.
And we ask them to be there when it's needed, but also to stand aside when it's really not priority matter.
Proprio come gli angeli custodi.
As you would with your angel personality.
Come ha detto prima Guido Guerzoni, sono per noi preziosissimi, tant'è che abbiamo fatto proprio un'indagine anche su di loro per capire quanto li ha aiutati a stare vicino al festival.
As we said before, we also made a survey to understand how useful it was for them to be involved with the festival.
Quindi molto spesso loro hanno cambiato le loro idee sui loro studi, sulle università da scegliere grazie all'esperienza fatta al festival.
And very often they changed their mind about which university they were going to attend or which university they were attending thanks to the experience they had during the festival.
E molti, grazie alla vicinanza degli autori, al confronto con alcuni scienziati piuttosto che altri, hanno poi potuto effettivamente trovare lavoro, non da noi perché anche noi siamo piccoli, ma in qualche altra realtà.
And some of them, thanks to the confrontation with authors and scientists, were able to find a job later, not through us because we are a small reality, but thanks to the contact they were able to make during the festival.
Quindi, come hanno detto le mie colleghe, credo che sia veramente una bellissima esperienza per chi ha, per noi va dai 18 ai 25 anni, una formazione veramente molto molto positiva.
So as my fellow colleagues said, it's a beautiful experience for those people that in our case are aged between 18 and 25, and it's a very formative experience as well.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you so much, Michela.
Grazie.
Thank you. So we've got 10 minutes. I'm going to suggest that we answer the next question, and you're going to have pinch things in a couple of minutes. So to any of the panel, I love this question, which literary festivals that had to venture into the digital space before you, did you pinch elements from, or, more elegantly, learn from when creating your digital festival? I do love pinch elements from. So let's see, Julianne. Who did you meet?
Well, I definitely pinched Hey Anwai. I love their festival, and I was supposed to go over actually for 2020, so I was devastated not to make it. I hadn't been for years, and I watched what they did. I thought they're going to do it well, and they used the platform that we use, Crowdcast. I loved it. I just thought it was very attractive. It was slick. It had a really good chat function. Everything about it, I thought, worked really well. So I had seen that and said, right, despite the tech team going, no, no. I was like, we're using it. And then the other thing was, I can still see it very well. I was watching, I think it was Other Voices. They were live streaming from the National Gallery. Lisa Hannigan, an Irish singer, and she was in the National Gallery. And I was looking at it longingly thinking, I would love to be there. I would love to see music like this. But it was really special because she was in that venue. And that's when I thought, right, I want to use our venues. I'd been talking to them. They were devastated to have the empty rooms and said if there's anything we can do. And that's when I thought, right, if we can bring authors into the venues and, give people that feeling of being there and maintain some sort of normality and give them that little bit of sense of being at a festival, that's what we'll do. And that was, for me, the moment where I wanted to do the pre-production. And, we were delighted with it. We got 20 events pre-recorded during September, and then released later on. So they were the two kind of main things that I pinched.
Well, good for you. You pinched them beautifully. It's all about the sense of things. I love the idea. I mean, one of them sounds quite strategic. You were sort of watching Hey and thinking, okay, which platform are they using? They're going to do it, it's going to be slick because it's Hey. So let me learn that. And the other was, it seems like a very personal response. Here is Lisa Hannigan. Oh God, I wish I was there in that space. And that was your sort of personal experience of how it felt to watch it in the space itself.
Exactly. And I think during that time of pre-recording, we were all very nervous and we needed to do it right. And, I wanted it to be a beautiful production. But seeing the authors, they'd all arrive and the facilitators, and we got so excited because we were seeing people and the energy from the authors. That's what, all of us were saying, this is what you miss. It's this energy. And even though it was only myself and the cameraman there, as a festival director, you'll all know you don't get to see every event or everything. I got to see 20 full events, which in my 11 years doing this, I have never ever seen. So I actually felt really emotional half the time. It was really exciting. And for the authors to see them so happy, engaging with other authors, which is a really important part of the festival. Our networking for authors and audiences and authors with audience is a really core part of our festival. So at least the authors got the energy from each other being in that room. And that was really, really exciting.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much. Michela, I'm going to come to you next. So same question. What did you or didn't you steal? What worked well?
Allora, noi siamo stati tra i primi festival che si sono potuti svolgere in presenza, quindi non abbiamo potuto guardare molto cosa è successo in giro, soprattutto in Italia.
We have been one of the first festivals that was able to be in person, so we didn't have the chance to see what was going to happen in other festivals, especially in Italy.
Però siccome avevamo paura che potesse succedere qualcosa, qualche chiusura repentina qualche giorno prima, come è successo, ho sentito qualche collega qualche settimana prima.
But since we were afraid that immediate closure may have happened, as we also heard other colleagues today talk about,
abbiamo subito pensato di fare questa cosa ibrida, quindi la parte in presenza e comunque la parte anche online. E abbiamo scelto di affidarci ad un'azienda leader con una televisione dedicata tutta ed esclusivamente a noi.
So we decided to go for the hybrid model because we wanted to be sure that in case anything happened, we were able to switch, and we decided to work with a leader company in the television industry where we had a television broadcast that was dedicated only to us.
E in questo modo abbiamo dato una qualità molto alta. In più abbiamo fatto quello che è stato anticipato sempre da Guerzoni prima.
In that way we were able to have a better streaming service and a better quality, and also we were able to do something that has already been anticipated by Guerzoni.
E siamo usciti dalla nostra città e siamo andati in altre 7 città vicine per poter non fare assembramento.
And we decided to go beyond our own city, and we went into 7 different cities so that we had the chance to maintain social distancing at all times.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So same question to Catherine.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we actually got an invite from an American festival, the Milwaukee Irish Fest, to collaborate with them, and also actually from the Dublin Book Festival. So thanks to Julianne for that. But what was interesting about the Irish Fest in the States was that it was 300, they usually would have 300,000 people at their physical event over, I think it's 75 hectares. So I was really curious as to how were they going to convert or pivot this online. A couple of things that I learned from that experience would be perhaps not to be shy about putting up a donate or a request for donations. That was something that we were very slow to include in the website. And then looking at other festivals in Ireland and in the UK, Cheltenham, HMY as well, and Court, you know, there was almost, we realized that perhaps our audience needed an opportunity or the ability to donate and help us, that there was a willingness there. We shouldn't be shy of that. So that was interesting. The Irish Fest as well in Milwaukee, what they did was they used Facebook as a platform to capture highlights from the events and then perhaps show them in the weeks after it. So in the past, we would have had, you know, highlights of our physical festival online, but we realized, I suppose, looking elsewhere, that there was a benefit in, I suppose, reflecting back for people who couldn't attend the live event to show them maybe little quotes or snippets or sections from those interviews in the weeks following the event. So that was another thing, a learning point from others. So yeah, thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. And Sally, so your experience might be different since you were, you know, so close to coming up. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this too.
Yes, I mean, as I said, we resisted Zoom, and I can't pretend I wasn't slightly anxious about that. Were we making the right decision? But I think, given that we thought also throughout that year we could put on one-off events and we didn't announce this because otherwise one was announcing dates to members of the public and authors and they were being constantly cancelled. It was in our thoughts this is what would happen, and I think for us it was the right thing. I think the level of literary debate and community engagement is the most, not to discredit or discount the Zoom aspect of it, but is the most powerful. And certainly we describe our festival as a festival family. So I don't know how other festival directors feel, but I know the night before I feel a bit nervous about all these people something coming. Is it going to be all right? There's so much hanging on it. And once you're in that first day, you remember how it all happens and it's generally fine. But that's what really I feel most encouraging is that the author starts to arrive and you recognise people, you meet new people. It's as if the family are coming together. They're members of the public health. And you recognise people that have been coming year on year on year. And there's something rather wonderful about that. So that sense of community, and it's also the importance of place, physical aspect of being physically in a place, listening to a particular writer. We are very, very lucky because we have access to these beautiful venues within the University of Oxford. So it's very, very special. And so that was the line we took, that we would hopefully have this great resurrection in the future.
That's brilliant. Yeah, and well, we're all looking forward to the great resurrection, quite frankly. So thank you so much, Sally. So we are out of time here. I'm quite smug. We're exactly at 4:30. So thank you so much to our panelists. I'm sorry that we didn't get to answer all the questions that we sent you, because I think it would have been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and we probably could have had, 3 hours. And just really enjoyed hearing all the different experiences and different answers. But so I would very much like to thank Julianne and Michela and Sally and Catherine, and also our student Julia for the expert on-the-spot translation. That was wonderful, that enabled us to keep Michela a full part of that conversation. I'm going to hand back to Angus now just to wrap us up. And thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
Yes, well, a big thank you from Julia and myself. Thank you to all our wonderful panelists and speakers this afternoon. Thank you for sparing the time and providing some fascinating insights and a little bit of debate about the future of literary festivals. So I think that's wonderful. I think we just need to close with some other thanks as well. So I want to thank Julia Rossetti, whose idea this event was. And so thank you very much to Julia for prompting the idea. Thank you to Julia for her wonderful translating skills. Thank you to Mika for putting it all together for us on the technical side and keeping us all in order. And I want to thank all our wonderful attendees who have come along this afternoon. If you're in a different time zone, it probably isn't the afternoon, but anyway, thank you for coming along. And I would like to thank our student supporters as well. And Julia, we've got a list of them that we should thank in person now.
Yes. So thank you very much for also who work behind the scenes. So our great IT and research team, as well as our students who really work very hard in organizing, planning and delivering this webinar. So thank you, Rebecca, Isabel, Fraser, Amy, Lyndon and Julia, our interpreter. So thank you very much. Thank you, Angus, as well, and the entire Oxford International Centre for publishing. And we really hope that you enjoyed this webinar. Would you like to add anything else, Angus?
No, I think we all deserve a cup of tea now. So thank you very much, everybody. And for wherever you are in the world, thank you very much for coming along. And the recording will be available in due course. So if you know somebody who wasn't able to come along, they can listen. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.